Welcome to Grim Chronicles, where we unearth the darkest corners of history, the stories so shocking they were buried for centuries. Tonight, we're stepping into the rotting heart of Tudor England, where the air of Whitehall Palace in January 1547 reeks of decay, and the man who once dazzled Europe as a golden prince lies dying in agony. King Henry VIII, the monarch who broke from Rome, executed queens, and reshaped a nation, ended his life in a way so horrifying that his own court hid the truth for 450 years. Secret medical records, private diaries, and modern forensic analysis have finally peeled back the lies, revealing a tale of jousting accidents, festering wounds, and a corpse so vile it burst apart. So settle in, hit that like button if you're ready for a gruesome journey, and let's uncover the horrific final days of England's most infamous king. Imagine standing in the tilt yard at Greenwich Palace on January 24, 1536. The winter air is sharp, your breath fogging as the crowd buzzes with anticipation. Hooves pound the frozen ground, and there he is, King Henry VIII, 44 years old, still a towering figure of strength and charm. His armor gleams in the pale sunlight, each piece a work of art worth more than a laborer could earn in a lifetime. This is no ordinary king. He's a Renaissance prince who pens poetry, composes music, speaks 4 languages, and debates theology with Europe's sharpest minds. The court calls him the handsomest ruler in Christendom, a man who dances until dawn and commands loyalty with a smile. Today, he's charging down the lists on his massive warhorse, lance aimed, the embodiment of Tudor power. The crowd holds its breath as he races toward his opponent. 2 armored titans colliding at breakneck speed. But then disaster strikes. The horses crash with the force of a modern car wreck. 300 pounds of man and metal slam into the ground. And the king's destrier, a beast bred for battle, stumbles and falls directly onto him. The tilt yard falls deathly silent. Courtiers freeze, their faces pale with dread. Is England's king dead? For 2 agonizing hours, Henry lies unconscious, his court in chaos. Queen and Boleyn, pregnant and desperate for a male heir, waits in terror for news. England has no ruler in those moments, and the future teeters on a knife's edge. When Henry finally opens his eyes, something is deeply wrong. Those bright blue eyes, once alive with wit and charm, now flicker with a strange, unsettling light. His first words aren't of relief or gratitude, but a furious demand to know why the tournament stopped. The man who woke up isn't the same one who fell. Modern neuroscientists, digging through historical records, now believe that crash caused a traumatic brain injury to his frontal lobe, the part of the brain that controls personality, impulse control, and reason. Before this day, Henry was a king of restraint for his era. He'd been married to Catherine of Aragon for over 20 years before seeking an annulment, executed few nobles compared to his predecessors, and ruled with a calculated charisma that won hearts across Europe. But after January 1536, that restraint vanishes, and Boleyn loses her head just 4 months later. Thomas Cromwell, his most trusted advisor, will follow. Henry's rages become legendary, his moods swinging from tears to violence in an instant. Servants whisper of finding him weeping uncontrollably one moment, then screaming for blood the next. The court, once a glittering hub of music and laughter, becomes a nest of fear, where a single misstep could mean death. The brain injury is only the beginning of Henry's nightmare. That catastrophic fall reopened an old wound on his leg, a scar from a previous jousting accident that had healed years earlier. In Tudor England, an open wound is a death sentence, just a very slow one. Without antibiotics or even a basic understanding of infection, what starts as a small tear becomes a horror show. Picture sores the size of tennis balls, oozing pus for 11 years, never healing, never scabbing over. The pain is so excruciating that the lightest brush of silk sheets makes Henry scream. Court physician Dr. Thomas Vickery, whose secret notes were hidden until the 1960s, described these ulcers as stinking and painful beyond measure. Servants drained them daily, sometimes twice. Filling bronze bowls with infected fluid, they rushed out of the royal presence. Henry, ever vain, tried to hide his deterioration. He designed special gutters with lead weights to compress the wounds, believing pressure would force them closed. Instead, it cut off circulation, making the infection worse. He doused himself in expensive Arabian perfumes, rose oil mixed with ambergris, to mask the stench, but nothing could cover the smell of rotting flesh. Even his iconic portraits were a lie, depicting him with athletic legs in that famous power stance, when in reality, his limbs were a mass of decay. The infection wasn't just destroying his legs. It was poisoning his entire bloodstream, sending toxins to his brain, his liver, his heart. Modern analysis points to chronic osteomyelitis, a bone infection that released a constant stream of bacteria and inflammatory compounds throughout his body, turning his life into a living hell. The pain was relentless, like a toothache in his legs that never stopped for over a decade. Fevers came and went, leaving him drenched in sweat one day and shivering with chills the next. His appetite swung wildly between nausea and insatiable hunger. But the worst were the neurological effects. The toxins crossing into his brain triggered violent mood swings that had nothing to do with his emotions. He'd laugh at a jest one moment, then order the jester's execution the next. Paranoia consumed him. He saw enemies everywhere. Servants poisoning his food, wives betraying him, assassins lurking in every shadow. By 1540, just 4 years after the accident, he'd executed his second wife, annulled his marriage to his third, and was pursuing Catherine Howard, a teenager of perhaps 17 to his 50 years. The contrast was grotesque. A king so obese he needed servants to lift him onto his horse, chasing a girl who reportedly needed wine to endure his advances. The court became a place where fear ruled, and the man who had once been England's pride was now its terror. By 1542, those festering ulcers took a darker turn, and the horror deepened. Dr. Vickery's notes, uncovered centuries later in a dusty archive, describe a chilling shift in the king's condition. The pus, once yellow-white, now turned green, then brown, with a smell so vile that witnesses called it the stench of death itself. Henry, unable to exercise due to the agony in his legs, turned to food for solace, his appetite spiraling out of control. His weight ballooned from an already hefty 280 pounds to well over 350. His armor from 1540 showing a 48-inch waist, and by 1545, a new set had to be crafted for a staggering 54-inch waist, wider than most modern refrigerators. Hampton Court Palace was modified to accommodate this new bulk. Doorways were widened, and you can still see the construction marks today. Floors were reinforced with extra beams after his weight caused dangerous sagging. Special chairs were built with removable arms because Henry could no longer fit between them. His daily routine became a humiliating performance, carefully concealed from public view. For servants dressed him while he lay in bed, his massive limbs too heavy for him to move alone. A system of pulleys and slings lifted him upright, and he was transferred to a wheeled chair, a secret kept from all but his closest attendants. The physical toll was matched by a mental collapse that turned the court into a house of horrors. Henry's paranoia, fueled by his brain injury and blood poisoning, reached feverish heights. He held conversations with people who weren't there, arguing with his dead father, Henry VII, about the royal treasury, or calling out for his mother, Elizabeth of York, who died when he was 11. Most chilling were his interactions with the ghosts of his victims. Courtiers reported him stopping mid-sentence during state business, his face draining of color as he stared into empty air, whispering, "No, not now," or "Leave me." The French ambassador recorded a haunting moment. Henry screaming at an empty chair, ordering Anne Boleyn to stop laughing at him. His paranoia extended to his servants. He became convinced they were poisoning his leg bandages, demanding to inspect the pus-soaked dressings himself, sniffing them suspiciously before they were burned. He hired food tasters not just for his meals but for his medicines, forcing servants to apply ointments to their own skin to test for poison. By 1544, his behavior had crossed into madness. A sneeze during an audience could lead to accusations of assassination by poison powder. A lady-in-waiting who accidentally stepped on his robe was banished. Her family's lands confiscated. Henry's obsession with death seeped into every corner of his court. His final portrait, the famous Whitehall painting by Hans Holbein, hides a macabre secret. When conservators X-rayed it in 1960, they found that Henry's left hand, shown gripping a cane, originally held a wooden staff topped with a human skull. This wasn't a mere Gothic quirk. Henry carried the staff everywhere, tapping it nervously during conversations, unnerving even his most loyal courtiers. Rumors swirled that the skull belonged to a monk from a dissolved monastery, or worse, one of his executed enemies. After his death, his son Edward VI ordered the detail painted over, unable to bear the image of his father as a death-obsessed tyrant. The court itself became a place of coded signals to survive Henry's moods. Pages used colored ribbons to warn of his disposition. Red for rage, black for depression, white for the rare moments of calm. By Christmas 1546, Henry was barely recognizable as human. His face had swollen to twice its normal size, distorted by fluid retention. His once bright blue eyes, celebrated by poets, were now yellow and bloodshot, sunken in pouches of discolored flesh. The stench of decay followed him everywhere, despite pounds of perfume and burning incense. Courtiers held pomanders to their noses during audiences, and some delicate ladies vomited after being forced to approach the throne. The king's pursuit of Catherine Howard was a grotesque spectacle. Her reported disgust, she needed wine to endure his bed, only fueled his paranoia. By this point, Henry's body was a walking nightmare. The ulcers had deepened, exposing bone in places, and the infection had spread to his bloodstream, causing fever, chills, and wild mood swings. His appetite, unchecked by his immobility, drove his weight higher, making even the simplest tasks like sitting or standing an ordeal. Yet Henry clung to his image as a powerful monarch. He ordered his portrait painters to depict him as vigorous and commanding, a lie that fooled no one who saw him in person. The court's elaborate efforts to hide his condition only underscored the horror. Servants fainted while changing his bandages, and the smell was so overpowering that windows were kept open even in freezing weather. Henry's life had become a cycle of pain, rage, and delusion, and the court was a stage for his slow, public decay. By the winter of 1546, the court was a place of hushed terror, a shadow of the vibrant Renaissance hub it had once been. The king, now 55, was a grotesque caricature of his former self, his body and mind crumbling under the weight of infection and trauma. The ulcers on his legs, which had tormented him for a decade, had grown so severe that they defied all medical efforts. Dr. Vickery's secret notes, uncovered in the 1960s, paint a horrifying picture. Wounds so deep that bone was visible, surrounded by blackened flesh that signaled gangrene. The smell was no longer just foul. It was unbearable, a miasma of death that clung to the palace like a curse. Servants fainted while changing Henry's bed sheets, their faces wrapped in cloths to block the stench. Windows stayed open despite the January chill, because a closed room filled with the odor of decay within minutes. His massive frame, now well over 400 pounds, made caring for him a logistical nightmare. It took 6 strong men to turn him in bed to prevent bed sores, though sores developed anyway, adding to the catalog of rotting flesh. His legs had swollen so much that the skin split in multiple places, weeping clear fluid that soaked through dozens of bandages daily. Henry's mental state oscillated between terrifying clarity and complete delirium. In his lucid moments, he was painfully aware of his mortality. He'd beg his physicians for a cure, promising unimaginable wealth if they could ease his suffering. When they failed, his rages were apocalyptic, threatening torture and execution, though he lacked the strength to sign the warrants. In his delirious periods, the true depths of his terror emerged. He'd cry out for his mother, Elizabeth of York, dead for nearly 40 years, begging her to protect him from demons he saw crawling from beneath his bed. He'd hold conversations with his brother Arthur, who died in 1502, apologizing for taking his throne and his wife, Catherine of Aragon. Most heartbreakingly, he'd call out for Catherine herself, pleading for forgiveness from the woman he'd abandoned and left to die alone 11 years earlier. These moments revealed a man haunted by his past, his guilt and fear manifesting as hallucinations that tormented him as much as his physical pain. The court maintained an elaborate facade to hide the king's condition. Official proclamations claimed Henry was recovering from a minor ailment, and ambassadors were told he was simply resting. Behind closed doors, Edward Seymour and the Privy Council were already planning for the succession, knowing Henry had days, perhaps hours, left. His body was failing in catastrophic ways. His kidneys, overwhelmed by the toxins from his infected legs, began shutting down. His urine, when he could produce it, was dark brown and reeked of ammonia. His abdomen swelled with fluid, adding to his massive girth and causing agonizing pressure on his organs. His tongue had swollen so badly he could barely speak, his words reduced to wet, gargling sounds that only his closest servants could interpret. His breath smelled of rotting meat, a sign that the infection had spread to his digestive system. By January 20th, 1547, Henry was entering multiple organ failure, his skin a sickly yellow from liver failure, his eyes matching, giving him an inhuman appearance. Yet even in this state he clung to power. On January 27th, he suffered a massive stroke, his right face drooping grotesquely, drool pooling on his pillow. His speech, already incomprehensible, vanished entirely. England's king, who had once commanded the Reformation with his words, couldn't even ask for water. Henry's final acts were those of a tyrant refusing to let go. Using his one functioning hand, he tried to sign death warrants, targeting even loyal servants like the Duke of Norfolk. The signature was an illegible scrawl, but his terrified servants prepared to carry out the execution, only stopped by Henry's death the next day. The court had become a prison of fear, where every action was dictated by the king's whims, even as he lay dying. The Privy Council worked frantically to maintain order, knowing that the truth of Henry's condition could spark panic or rebellion. Ambassadors were kept at bay, and courtiers were sworn to secrecy on pain of death. The king's body, once a symbol of divine power, was now a source of revulsion, a reminder of mortality that no amount of perfume or pomp could disguise. On January 28, 1547, Whitehall Palace was cloaked in dread. Archbishop Thomas Cranmer's private diary, discovered in 1983 at Lambeth Palace, provides the only eyewitness account of those final hours, and it's a scene straight out of a nightmare. Summoned near midnight to administer last rites, Cranmer found a king unrecognizable as human. Henry's massive body convulsed with seizures so violent that 6 men struggled to hold him down to prevent further injury. The reinforced bed frame, built to withstand his 400-pound bulk, cracked under the force of his thrashing. Between seizures, he vomited black bile, a sign of internal hemorrhaging in his digestive system. The smell was beyond description. Cranmer had to step outside twice to vomit. Henry's eyes, wild with fear, fixed on things that weren't there. He cried out for his dead children, the miscarriages and stillbirths that had haunted his quest for heirs, begging them to forgive him. His voice would shift to a high, terrified pitch as he screamed about flames, demanding someone put out a fire only he could see. As the clock neared 2 a.m., Henry's breathing changed to the death rattle, a wet, gurgling sound as his lungs filled with fluid. Cranmer, following Protestant doctrine, asked the king to give a sign if he trusted in Christ for salvation. Taking Henry's swollen hand, he urged him to squeeze if he died in faith. Henry managed 1 weak squeeze before his grip went slack. At 2:07 a.m. on January 28, 1547, Henry VIII was dead. But the horror didn't end with his last breath. It grew worse. His corpse began decomposing with terrifying speed, the infection that had ravaged him in life now accelerating in death. Within hours, his already bloated body swelled further as bacteria produced gases inside the corpse. The smell, already unbearable, became so intense that servants outside the death chamber were heard retching. The Privy Council, led by Edward Seymour, made a drastic decision: keep Henry's death secret for 3 days. This wasn't just politics. They needed time to manage a corpse so grotesque it could spark scandal. Embalmers were summoned, but their task was impossible. When they opened Henry's body to remove his organs for preservation, they found a scene of unimaginable decay. His liver, swollen and diseased, fell apart at the touch. His heart, nearly twice its normal size, was surrounded by yellow fluid. His intestines were black with gangrene, and when the stomach was opened, the stench was so overpowering that one embalmer's assistant fainted, and others fled the room. The embalmers worked for 2 days, packing the body cavity with over 100 pounds of salt and aromatic herbs, wrapping it in wax cloth soaked in turpentine, and sealing it in a massive lead coffin reinforced to hold the weight. But even these measures couldn't contain the decay. During the lying-in state at Whitehall, witnesses heard pops and gurgles from inside the coffin as gases built up. The lead began to bulge, and officials draped more black cloth over it to hide the distortion. The procession to Windsor Castle for burial was a nightmare. The coffin, weighing nearly half a ton, required a special carriage pulled by 8 horses. The journey, meant to take 1 day, stretched to 3 as the horses struggled through winter mud. On the second night, the procession stopped at Sion Abbey, a monastery Henry had dissolved years earlier. There, the unthinkable happened. The pressure from the gases inside the coffin became too much, and it split open with a sound like a thunderclap. Putrid fluids leaked onto the chapel floor, the smell so overwhelming that guards fled their posts. In the morning, workers found dogs licking at the fluids, a final indignity for a king who had styled himself as God's anointed. Workers used sawdust and lime to clean the mess, their faces wrapped in cloths, and the coffin was resealed with fresh lead. When it finally reached Windsor Castle, Henry was buried quickly, without the grand ceremony planned, to avoid further scandal. Henry VIII's death was no quiet passing of a monarch. It was a grotesque spectacle that his court fought to erase from history. The man who had broken from Rome, executed wives, and reshaped England's destiny ended his life screaming in terror, his body a 400-pound mass of infection that exploded in its coffin. The dogs licking his remains at Sion Abbey were the final insult to a king who once dazzled Christendom as its handsomest ruler. But why does this matter? Why dig up this hidden history on grim chronicles? Because Henry's final days reveal the fragility of power, the cost of unchecked ambition, and the human toll of a life driven by pride and paranoia. The cover-up orchestrated by Edward Seymour and the Privy Council was more than damage control. It was a desperate bid to preserve the Tudor myth of divine rule. Henry's reign had been built on the idea that he was God's chosen, a king whose will was law. To admit that he died raving, his body rotting beyond recognition, would have shattered that image. Edward VI, just 9 years old, inherited a throne built on his father's legacy, and the truth of Henry's end could have undermined his rule before it began. The silence ordered at Sion Abbey, the rushed burial at Windsor, the painted-over skull in his portrait, all were pieces of a puzzle meant to keep England stable. But the truth has a way of leaking out. Private diaries, like Archbishop Cranmer's and foreign ambassadors' reports, slipped through the cracks, giving us glimpses of the horror. Centuries later, forensic analysis and newly discovered medical records have filled in the rest, painting a picture of a king undone by his own body and mind. Henry's descent began with that jousting accident in 1536, a moment that transformed a Renaissance prince into a tyrant. The traumatic brain injury and chronic infection that followed didn't just destroy his health, they reshaped England. His paranoia fueled the executions of Anne Boleyn, Thomas Cromwell, and countless others. His pain and rage drove the dissolution of the monasteries, a seismic shift that enriched the crown but left England's religious landscape in chaos. His obsession with producing a male heir, intensified by his deteriorating mind, led to 6 marriages, each more desperate than the last. Yet there's something deeply human in Henry's story. Behind the tyrant was a man tormented by pain, haunted by guilt, and terrified of death. His cries for his mother, his pleas to his dead children, his apologies to Catherine of Aragon. These were the fragments of a soul laid bare. Henry wasn't just a monster. He was a man broken by his own choices, his body a mirror of the chaos he inflicted on England. His final portrait, with its hidden skull, captures this duality. The king who wanted to be remembered as powerful, yet couldn't escape his obsession with mortality. The dogs at Sion Abbey, lapping at his remains, were a grim reminder that no amount of power can defy the grave. This is why we tell these stories on Grim Chronicles. History isn't just dates and battles. It's the raw, messy truth of human lives. Henry VIII's end forces us to confront the cost of power, the lies we tell to preserve it, and the fragility of even the mightiest. If this tale of a king's horrific downfall has gripped you, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more hidden histories. Share this video with anyone who loves the dark side of the past. And let us know in the comments what shocked you most about Henry's final days. Was it the exploding coffin, the skull-topped staff, or the court's desperate cover-up? Until next time, keep chasing the truth with Grim Chronicles.